Hi team, welcome to day 2 of our mini Learn Yoga Anatomy series. Today we're going to be cover what's in module 2 in the functional anatomy course. This is going to be going over the NASM's overhead squat assessment. So this is my yoga take on the overhead squat. We're going to go over what is the overhead squat. I'll show you how to do it. I'll give you some intentions to look for while you're watching it. And then we will specifically cover what is tight, what is weak, what's overactive, what's underactive, and what is some good yoga to include if you notice your knees coming together in a pose like chair pose and in a pose that looks like a squat. This is really great to help you notice compensations in your daily lives, notice where it feels tight, where it feels weak, and then just some areas that you can specifically focus on during your workouts while you add in some corrective exercise as well as when you're on your yoga mat. Let's begin. So for your overhead squat, you can either find a loved one, find a partner, find a friend, or you can just film yourself. To set yourself up for the overhead squat, step your feet about 3 feet apart. So this is a little bit wider than hips distance. If you naturally want to splay your toes out east and west, I want to challenge you to bring your toes back forward. If you're looking from the back, you should only be able to see the outside 2 to 3 toes. 2 toes a little bit better than 3, but just notice if you want to always set yourself up with your toes out wide for a squat. You're gonna bring your arms up overhead. Your palms are set to touch each other. So the arms just come up, pull them back in line with your ears. From here, we're specifically today just going to be talking about the anterior view. So this is setting the camera up from a front angle so you can see yourself from the front view. So with the hands up, I just want you to squat down. So you're just gonna squat and come back up. Squat and back up. Squat and back up. You can turn your muscles on if that feels natural for you, and then do about 5 to 10 of them. That way you can see, because your pose will progress as the reps continue. Think of this assessment like chair pose. So in chair pose, we always ask our students to let the knees come together. Versus king chair is gonna be with the knees stacked, maybe the feet about 2 fist distance, maybe 3 or 4 fist distance, whatever's natural for that student. If you are noticing the knees coming together in your overhead squat, number 1, you are not alone. This is one of the most common compensations we see with squatting. What does this mean? It could mean that number 1, you have fat feet. So look down at your feet from that frontal view. Do you notice your arch wanting to flatten? Do you notice the toes wanting to splay out? If the toes splay out, the knees really easy for them to dive in. So that could be your compensation pattern. Notice if you more intentionally ground down through the base of your big toe, if you can get rid of some of this arch collapsing to then be able to keep the knees stacked a little bit wider. Some of the overactive muscles, if you are noticing the knees coming together, are going to be your inner thighs, your adductors. Because when your inner thighs, if we look at Alfred here, your inner thighs here, this is going to be underactive. So if it's underactive, the knees, easy for them to collapse into all of that new space because the muscle is not holding its integrity to hold the knee wide. It's kind of collapsing into the adductors. Another muscle that could be tight is your TFL. Your TFL is a hip flexor muscle, lives on the outside of your hip here. So it's not in the front of your hip where you think of true psoas. It's a little bit to the outside, your TFL. Other tight muscles could be the outside calves wanting to pull you out, and pulling the lower leg out, and then the knees are falling inwards. Another tight muscle could be the outside hamstring. If the outside hamstring is tight, it's going to be squeezing so tight on the outside that it just wants to naturally fall to the middle because it can't go any wider. The outside is too tight, it's too taut, that naturally the knees then want to fall into the space that is easy and allows them to fall into. Some of the muscles that you can think of as being underactive is my favorite, number 1, the gluteus medius. The gluteus medius lives on the outside of your hip. So if you think about this bone here, this is called your greater trochanter. If you take your hand to the outside of your hip and then just wiggle your toes in and out, you'll feel a really big, thick bone on the outside of your leg. This is part of your femur. It is your greater trochanter. The gluteus medius lives right behind there. So it lives somewhere between your pelvis and then this big bone that we were just feeling. If you touch it, it's probably very tight. It's pretty easy to find. This muscle helps externally rotate your lower legs, helps externally rotate your hips. So if this muscle is weak, as it is on a lot of women specifically, because women tend to have wider hips than men for childbearing, if this muscle is weak, the knees then easily can fall in because the muscle on the outside of your hips aren't pulling you wider. Those muscles are either too length or too shortened to activate, that it's easy for the knees to fall in, because this muscle, once it's activated, will actually pull you into external rotation. When the knees fall into the midline, you can think of them as being a little bit internally rotated. Other muscles that can be underactive is going to be your VMO. Your VMO is your vastus medialis oblique. It is one of your quad muscles. Again, women with wider hips, this will be a little bit weaker, maybe a little bit weaker than especially on men. But this muscle lives on the inside of your thigh. And if this is tight on the inside of your thigh, if this is underactive, easy for the knees to fall in. Again, those muscles aren't there to support it, to hold the integrity on the inner thighs. So again, easy for the bones to fall in towards the midline. Other underactive muscles could be your inner hamstring as well as your inner calf, because again, those aren't holding the integrity for then the muscles to be able to pull you wide. Easy, again, for the knees to fall into the midline. Some of the yoga stretches that could help if you are experiencing this, or if one of your students is experiencing this sensation, is going to be downward facing dog. Downward facing dog will stretch the lateral hamstring, will stretch the lateral calf, lateral just meaning outside. We'll stretch them, especially if you find a downward dog with the toes facing the midline. So in your next down dog, play with it. If you bring the toes in and the heels out versus the toes out and the heels in, this will entirely change the posture for you. You have 3 different hamstrings. So notice, next time you're on neutral feet, can you feel all 3? If you bring your toes in, can you specifically feel maybe just the outside a little bit more intense? If you bring your toes out, can you feel the inner hamstring and maybe the inner calf a little bit more intense as far as a stretch goes? Another really great posture is going to be simple forward folds. Again, play with the toes in and the heels out. Because if your knees are coming into the midline, the outside hamstring's probably overactive. So play with where your feet are to then play and see if that you can feel a little bit deeper stretch in one position or the other. Other yoga that is really good to help build strength, if you notice your knees coming together in an overhead squat, are going to be clamshells. So laying on your side, stacking your knees and your feet together, and then bringing your knees apart. So these are like the Jane Fondas. You want to keep your ankles together, bring your hips about 45 degrees, and bringing your knees to about 45 degrees. Keeping your ankles together, bring your knees apart. Bring them together. Bring them apart, bring them together. You can do this with or without a little resistance band. Another great to add in is going to be your king chair. So just putting them into chair pose and then cueing on the glutes on the outside. So one of my favorite cues is come into your king chair and then pretend like you're stepping on a piece of paper. Pretend that you want to rip that piece of paper in half. So you're stepping on with your left and right foot. As if you can reach and stretch that piece of paper in half energetically, squeeze through the outside of your hips. This cue alone sometimes helps people feel their glute med before they even know that it's firing up and said, oh man, I feel that on the outside of my hips immensely. Then absolutely yes, you are doing it correct. Another really great pose and super simple to add in is going to be bridge with a strap. So if you think about any sort of a bridge, I want you to make sure that your students are feeling a bridge in their glutes and their hamstrings. A lot of the times, students I've had in class, when I ask them, they only feel a bridge throughout the front of their knee. Well, a bridge, especially a traditional bridge, is called a glute bridge in the workout world. So if you are not feeling bridge pose in your glutes and your hamstrings, you need to change something. Option number 1, take a strap and loop it around their ankles. Have them reach down like they can reach their ankles and grab onto the strap wherever they can. So they're pulling on the strap. The strap is around their ankles. They have one side on each hand of the strap, pulling on the strap, and then almost like they can send their knees forward. So they would send their knees towards their toes. Little different variation of bridge pose, but sometimes this helps them feel it in the glutes and the hamstrings a little bit more. Another option, especially to activate through the VMO as well as the medial hamstrings and calf is to add a block squeeze. So during your next bridge, you can add a block squeeze between your knees. You can also add a block squeeze in your chair pose if that helps turn on the inner thighs, making sure that the outside glutes are engaged as well.